What if the quietest girl in school carried a secret so powerful it could change the life of a wealthy CEO's family forever? Stay tuned for a tale of friendship and sacrifice. In the bustling corridors of Meadow Creek High, Lucas Carter, the confident son of tech mogul Alexander Carter, commanded attention wherever he went. With his easy charisma and the wealth of his family looming behind him, he was used to people treating him as royalty. Yet amid the sea of faces vying for his approval, there was one who didn't even seem to notice him: Clara Hayes. Clara was a quiet girl, always seated in the corner of the classroom, her head bent over her notebook. Her clothes were simple, clean but worn, her shoes patched in places, and her backpack stitched together from years of wear and tear. She kept to herself, her head lowered as she walked past the chatter and noise of her peers. What no one at school knew, however, was that Clara's life was far removed from the privileges of Meadow Creek's elite. Living with her younger brother Jake in a tiny one-bedroom apartment on the city's outskirts, Clara bore the weight of responsibility far beyond her years. Her mother, Mia, worked double shifts at a local diner, leaving Clara to care for Jake, cook, clean, and still keep up with her studies. Despite their struggles, the Hayes family was bound by an unshakable bond of love and resilience. The Carters, in stark contrast, lived in an architectural marvel of glass and steel perched on the city's hilltop. Alexander Carter was a man of precision and control, a visionary who had transformed a modest tech startup into a global empire. Yet, his relentless pursuit of success had come at a cost. The Carter mansion was grand, but its halls often echoed with an unsettling silence. Lucas had grown up surrounded by every luxury imaginable, yet he often felt the emptiness his father tried to mask with material wealth. His mother, Sophia, had passed away when he was 10, leaving a void no amount of opulence could fill. While Alexander buried himself in work, Lucas sought solace in his friends and his passion for drawing, an art form that his father viewed as a frivolous distraction. One afternoon during a group assignment in art class, fate placed Lucas and Clara in the same group. Initially, their interactions were brief, with Clara speaking only when necessary. But as the project progressed, Lucas began noticing the intricate, lifelike sketches she made. Her drawings had a depth that intrigued him, and soon Lucas found himself drawn to her quiet strength and extraordinary talent. Lucas, curious about Clara's reserved nature, started asking her questions. At first, Clara was hesitant to open up, but Lucas's genuine interest disarmed her. She shared bits and pieces about her life, how she loved sketching because it helped her escape the world's noise, how her favorite subjects were the simple, unnoticed things like the texture of fallen leaves or the sunlight filtering through the school windows. Lucas was mesmerized by her perspective. Unlike the shallow conversations he was accustomed to, Clara's words resonated with him. He began to spend more time with her, walking with her after class and even offering her a ride home once. Clara refused politely, insisting she preferred walking. What Lucas didn't know was that her refusal came from fear that he might see where she lived and realize how vastly different their worlds were. Back at home, Clara's life was a whirlwind of responsibilities. She juggled helping Jake with his homework, cooking dinner, and doing odd jobs to support her mother. Despite her exhaustion, she stayed up late sketching, pouring her emotions into her artwork. Little did she know, her life. The more Lucas got to know Clara, the more he admired her resilience and talent. He began sharing his own passion for drawing, something he rarely did with others. One afternoon, while working on a class project together, Lucas brought her to his favorite spot, a quiet bench beneath a sprawling oak tree on the school grounds. He showed her a sketchbook filled with his own art, and for the first time, Clara saw a glimpse of his vulnerable side. "You're really good," she said, her voice sincere. "Why don't you show your work to more people?" Lucas shrugged, looking away. "My dad doesn't think art is worth much. He wants me to take over his company one day." Clara sensed the weight behind his words and hesitated before responding. Sometimes what we love isn't what others expect of us, but it doesn't mean it's any less important." Lucas was struck by her wisdom. From that moment, their bond deepened. He started inviting her to join him and his friends during lunch, despite their puzzled looks. Clara was hesitant at first, but Lucas's warmth and encouragement gave her the confidence to step out of her comfort zone. As weeks passed, Lucas and Clara's friendship became a source of intrigue for the students at Meadow Creek High. Whispers followed them in the hallways, with many speculating why Lucas, the school's golden boy, would spend so much time with someone as unassuming as Clara. Among the curious onlookers was Jenna, one of Lucas's closest friends, who decided to confront him one day after school. "Why her, Lucas?" she asked, disbelief evident in her voice. "You could be friends with anyone." Lucas sighed, exasperated. "Maybe that's the problem, Jenna. Clara's different. She doesn't care about what I have or who my dad is. She's real." Jenna rolled her eyes but let the matter drop. Despite the scrutiny, Lucas found solace in his friendship with Clara. She challenged his perspective, making him see the world through a lens far removed from privilege. Clara, on the other hand, struggled to reconcile her growing connection with Lucas and the fear of her reality being exposed. One rainy afternoon, Lucas spotted her walking home, clutching her sketchpad under her jacket. He insisted on giving her a ride, and this time, Clara couldn't refuse. As they drove through the city, Clara directed Lucas to her neighborhood, a stark contrast to the grandeur of his own. The narrow streets were lined with crumbling buildings, and children played with makeshift toys in the puddles. Lucas tried to hide his shock, but Clara noticed the change in his demeanor. "This is my stop," she said, her voice quiet. "Thanks for the ride." The image of Clara's neighborhood lingered in Lucas's mind long after she got out of the car. He couldn't shake the feeling of unease. It was as if he'd just glimpsed a reality he had been shielded from his entire life. At home, he tried to bring up the subject with his father during dinner. "Dad, do you ever think about what life is like for people who don't have what we do?" Lucas asked, pushing his food around on his plate. Alexander barely looked up from his phone. "It's just the way the world works, Lucas. Some people succeed and others don't. That's why I've worked hard, to make sure you don't have to struggle." The answer left Lucas frustrated, but he didn't push further. Instead, he channeled his emotions into his art, spending hours sketching the contrast between his life and Clara's. Meanwhile, Clara's life grew more complicated. Her mother, Mia, had fallen ill, forcing Clara to take on additional responsibilities to keep their household afloat. She worked late into the night, leaving little time for her schoolwork. Lucas noticed the exhaustion in her eyes and offered to help, tutoring her in subjects she struggled with. During one of their study sessions, Clara hesitated before speaking. "Lucas, why are you doing all this? Helping me, I mean." "Because I believe in you," he replied simply. "You're stronger than you think, Clara." Her heart swelled with gratitude, but also with a sense of dread. She knew she couldn't keep her secret hidden much longer. Clara's secret unraveled unexpectedly one Friday evening. Lucas had decided to surprise her with a set of high-quality sketching pencils, something he'd overheard her mentioning she couldn't afford. When he arrived at her apartment complex, he saw her younger brother Jake sitting on the steps, shivering in the cold. "Hey, buddy," Lucas said gently, kneeling down. "What are you doing out here?" Jake hesitated, clutching a worn-out jacket around his small frame. "Mom's not feeling well and Clara's trying to make soup, but we ran out of food. I didn't want to bother her." Lucas's heart sank. He quickly ushered Jake inside and knocked on the apartment door. When Clara opened it, her face was pale, and her eyes widened in shock at the sight of Lucas. "Lucas, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I wanted to bring you something," he said, holding up the pencils. But his attention shifted to the cramped apartment behind her, an old couch with frayed edges, a flickering light bulb, and Mia lying on a thin mattress, coughing weakly. Clara's cheeks burned with embarrassment as she stepped aside to let him in. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Lucas placed the pencils on the table and turned to her. Clara, why didn't you tell me things were this hard? Tears welled up in her eyes. Because I didn't want your pity. You're from a world that's so different from mine. I didn't want you to see this. Lucas sat Clara down and listened as she poured out everything. How her mother's health had been declining for months, how she worked odd jobs to keep them afloat, and how she feared what people at school would think if they knew the truth about her life. You don't understand, Lucas, she said, wiping her tears. Your world is full of possibilities. Mine is full of limitations. Every day, I wake up wondering how to get through another day without losing hope. Lucas felt a lump in his throat. He realized that his friendship with Clara had given him a glimpse into a reality he had never experienced, a life where strength was born from necessity, not privilege. Determined to help, Lucas offered to talk to his father about arranging medical care for Mia. At first, Clara resisted, but Lucas's sincerity broke through her defenses. You don't have to do this, Lucas, she said softly. I want to, he replied. You've been there for everyone else. Let someone be there for you. That night, Lucas returned home with a newfound determination. He didn't just want to help Clara, he wanted to prove to his father that their wealth could be a force for good. The next morning, Lucas approached his father during breakfast. Alexander Carter, seated at the head of the table with his tablet in hand, barely glanced up as Lucas sat down. Dad, Lucas began, his voice steady. I need your help. Alexander frowned slightly. Help with what? School? Your art competition? No, Lucas said firmly. It's about a friend. Her mom is really sick and they can't afford the care she needs. I was wondering if we could step in. Alexander set down his tablet, regarding Lucas with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Lucas, we can't solve everyone's problems. There are thousands of people in this city facing hardships. We donate to charities. Isn't that enough? Lucas clenched his fists under the table. This isn't just anyone, Dad. This is Clara. She's not looking for handouts. She's one of the strongest people I know, but she's in a situation she can't fix on her own. Isn't it worth helping someone when we actually can? Alexander sighed, leaning back in his chair. Lucas, life doesn't work that way. Helping her might open the door to more complications. You need to focus on your own future, not on fixing someone else's. For the first time, Lucas felt a surge of anger toward his father. Maybe that's why things feel so empty around here, he snapped, standing up. Because we've forgotten how to actually care. Alexander watched him leave the room, a flicker of something, guilt or perhaps pride, crossing his face. Despite his father's resistance, Lucas didn't back down. He spent the next few days researching local clinics and programs that might help Clara's family. Eventually, he found a nonprofit organization that specialized in medical aid for low-income families. With a little persistence, Lucas managed to get an appointment for Mia. When he told Clara, she was overwhelmed with gratitude. Lucas, you didn't have to go this far. I did, he interrupted, smiling. Because it's the right thing to do. And because you've shown me what it means to be brave. On the day of the appointment, Lucas drove Clara and Mia to the clinic, sitting with them through every step. The doctor's diagnosis was hopeful. Mia's condition was treatable with the right medication and rest. Lucas discreetly covered the cost of the treatment, knowing Clara would never have accepted if she'd known. Word of Lucas's involvement eventually reached Alexander through the family's driver. That evening, Alexander called Lucas into his study. I heard about what you did, Alexander said, his tone unreadable. Lucas braced himself for criticism, but Alexander surprised him. You remind me of your mother, he said quietly. She always believed in helping others, no matter what. Lucas's eyes widened. Does that mean you're not angry? Alexander gave a faint smile. Number, it means I'm proud. And maybe it's time I started seeing things your way. Alexander's unexpected approval gave Lucas renewed confidence. True to his word, Alexander took action, reaching out to a private healthcare provider to ensure Mia's long-term treatment. He also arranged for a scholarship fund to support Clara and Jake's education, under the condition that it remain anonymous. When Lucas shared the news with Clara, she was overwhelmed. "Why would your dad do all of this?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. "Because he knows it's the right thing to do," Lucas replied with a warm smile. "And because you've shown me, and him, that strength isn't about money or power. It's about resilience, the kind you show every day." As Clara hugged him, a newfound sense of hope bloomed in her heart. For the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of her struggles begin to lift. But as Clara's world started to change for the better, Lucas couldn't help but notice that she was still holding something back. A secret lingered in her eyes. A secret that, he sensed, had the potential to change everything. The revelation came on an otherwise ordinary school day. Lucas and Clara were in the library working on an art project when Clara's younger brother Jake burst into the room, breathless and excited. "Clara!" Jake exclaimed, holding up a crumpled piece of paper. "It's the photo." Clara's face turned pale as she quickly grabbed the paper and tried to hide it, but Lucas had already seen enough. The photograph was of a much younger Clara, standing beside a man Lucas instantly recognized, Alexander Carter, his father. "What is this?" Lucas asked, his voice low but filled with confusion. Clara hesitated, tears brimming in her eyes. It's complicated." Lucas's mind raced as he pieced together the implications. "Clara, why do you have a picture of my dad? What's going on?" Taking a deep breath, Clara finally revealed the truth. "Your father. He's the reason we're struggling. Years ago, he and my mom worked together. They were close, too close. When she became pregnant with me, he walked away. My mom never told him about me. She didn't want to cause problems for his family." Lucas felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. "Are you saying we're family?" Clara nodded, her tears spilling over. "I didn't want you to find out this way. I didn't want you to think I was using you." Stunned, Lucas struggled to process the revelation. The friend he had grown to care about deeply was, in fact, his half-sister. Lucas sat frozen, the weight of Clara's revelation pressing down on him. Questions swirled in his mind, but one thought stood out. His father's role in this. "Does he know?" Lucas finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara shook her head. My mom never told him. She was afraid he'd deny it or try to take us away from her. She thought it was better to raise us on her own." Lucas felt a surge of anger, not at Clara or her mother, but at his father. How could someone who preached hard work and responsibility have abandoned an entire family? He looked at Clara, who seemed smaller and more fragile than he'd ever seen her. "You should have told me," he said softly, though there was no accusation in his tone. Clara's gaze dropped. "I was scared. I didn't want to ruin what we had, or risk losing you as a friend." Lucas took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "We're more than friends now, Clara. Whether we like it or not, we're family. And that means I'm not walking away from this. Neither of us deserves to carry the weight of his decisions." Lucas confronted his father that evening. The tension in the room was palpable as Lucas placed the crumpled photograph on Alexander's desk. "What's this?" Alexander asked, frowning as he picked up the photo. "You tell me," Lucas said coldly. Alexander studied the image, his brow furrowing in recognition. Then, as realization dawned, his expression shifted to one of shock. "Where did you get this?" "From Clara," Lucas replied. "The girl you've been helping, the girl you abandoned without even knowing it. She's my friend, my half-sister, and you walked away from her mother when she needed you the most." Alexander's face paled. "Lucas, it's not that simple. Your mother and we were trying to make things work. I couldn't." You couldn't what? Lucas interrupted, his voice rising. Take responsibility? Own up to your mistakes? You left them to struggle while you built an empire. Alexander fell silent, guilt etched into his features. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice that was barely audible, Alexander said, I didn't know. That doesn't make it right, Lucas said firmly. You have the power to fix this, to be better. But it's up to you to decide if you will. Alexander stared at the photograph, his hands trembling. Lucas didn't wait for a response. You have a chance to make things right, Dad. Don't waste it. The next morning, Alexander took Lucas's words to heart. He sat in his study, staring at the photograph and replaying the events of years past. Regret coursed through him as he realized the depth of his mistakes, not just as a businessman or a husband, but as a person who had failed to acknowledge the consequences of his actions. Determined to confront his past, Alexander invited Clara and her mother Mia to the Carter mansion. Clara was hesitant at first, but Lucas reassured her. This is about holding him accountable, Clara. He needs to face the truth. When Mia and Clara arrived, Alexander stood at the grand entrance, visibly nervous. His typically composed demeanor was replaced by uncertainty. As Mia approached, her eyes betrayed years of pain and resilience. Clara stayed close by her side, her expression guarded. Thank you for coming, Alexander began, his voice uncharacteristically humble. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to start by saying how sorry I am. For everything. Mia raised an eyebrow. Sorry doesn't erase the years of hardship, Alexander. I had to raise 2 children on my own, working every hour I could just to keep a roof over their heads. Alexander nodded, guilt evident in his eyes. I can't change the past, but I can change the future. I want to make things right, not just for Clara and Jake, but for you too, Mia. You shouldn't have had to go through this alone. The conversation that followed was raw and emotional. Mia recounted the sacrifices she had made, her voice steady but tinged with bitterness. Clara sat silently, listening as her mother laid bare the struggles of their past. Lucas watched his father closely, half expecting him to grow defensive or dismissive. But Alexander surprised him. Instead of arguing or making excuses, he listened. For the first time, Lucas saw a man who was vulnerable, who genuinely wanted to atone for his mistakes. I've started setting things in motion, Alexander said when Mia finished speaking. I've arranged for comprehensive health care for you and the children, as well as financial support to ensure Clara and Jake can focus on their education. This isn't about charity. It's about taking responsibility. Clara finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. It's not just about money, Mr. Carter. I spent my whole life wondering who my father was, wondering why he wasn't there. You can't fix that with a check. Alexander looked at her, tears glistening in his eyes. You're right, Clara. I can't fix it, but I can be here now, if you'll let me. I want to be part of your lives, not because I have to, but because I want to. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then Mia placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. It's your decision, she said softly. Clara hesitated, her emotions warring within her. Finally, she nodded. We can try, but it'll take time. Alexander smiled faintly. Time is a gift I'm willing to earn. The days that followed were a period of cautious adjustment for everyone involved. Alexander made it a priority to visit Clara and her family regularly, slowly building the trust he had neglected for so long. At first, the interactions were awkward. Clara struggled to reconcile the image of the powerful CEO with the man who was now trying to make amends. Lucas played a key role in bridging the gap, often acting as a mediator during family dinners and outings. He encouraged Clara to show Alexander her artwork, knowing how much it meant to her. Tentatively, she shared a sketch, a delicate portrait of Jake laughing under the shade of a tree. Alexander stared at the drawing for a long moment before saying, "You have an incredible gift, Clara. It's something to be proud of." Clara's walls began to crumble, brick by brick. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine what a relationship with her father might look like. Meanwhile, Alexander took a hard look at his own life. The experience had awakened something in him, a realization that his wealth and success were meaningless without meaningful connections. He began making changes within his company, creating scholarships for underprivileged youth and funding community outreach programs. One sunny afternoon, Alexander invited Clara and Jake to visit the Carter mansion. The children's eyes widened in amazement as they stepped inside the sprawling estate. Lucas guided Jake toward the game room, while Clara hesitated in the foyer, taking in the grandeur that felt so far removed from her reality. Alexander approached her, sensing her unease. "This house was always so empty," he admitted. "It feels alive for the first time because you're here." Clara managed a small smile. "It's still a lot to take in. I never imagined being here, meeting you, or any of this." Alexander nodded. "I know I can't change the past, Clara, but I'm grateful for this chance to move forward." As the day wore on, the family shared stories and laughter. Clara began to see glimpses of the father she had always wished for, and Alexander started to earn the trust he so desperately sought. For the first time in years, the mansion was filled with warmth, joy, and the sounds of family. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Alexander gathered everyone in the garden for a simple but heartfelt toast. Raising his glass, he said, "To second chances, and to the strength that brings us together, even when the odds seem impossible." Clara and Lucas exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared to bring their family to this moment. Months passed, and the new dynamic within the Carter and Hayes families began to solidify. Alexander, true to his word, maintained his support for Clara's family. He set up a trust fund for Jake's education and ensured that Mia had access to top-tier medical care. But what mattered most to Clara wasn't the financial assistance. It was Alexander's consistent presence. He attended Clara's first art exhibition at a local gallery, where her sketches of everyday resilience and family love captivated the audience. Lucas had helped her prepare for the big day, encouraging her every step of the way. As the room filled with applause, Clara saw her father standing in the corner, his eyes glistening with pride. "You've got a talent that the world needs to see," Alexander said, embracing her after the show. "And I'm honored to be part of this journey with you." The connection between Lucas and Clara deepened, not just as siblings but as allies in navigating their blended family. They often spent time together, with Lucas introducing Clara to new techniques in art, while Clara showed him the value of finding beauty in life's imperfections. The Carter mansion, once a symbol of isolation and grandeur, transformed into a place of belonging. Family dinners became a regular occurrence, filled with stories, laughter, and the kind of warmth that money could never buy. Mia, though initially guarded, began to see Alexander in a new light, appreciating his efforts to make amends. One evening, as the family gathered in the garden for a barbecue, Clara reflected on how far they had come. She watched as Lucas taught Jake how to play chess, and her mother shared a quiet laugh with Alexander. For the first time in her life, Clara felt the weight of her struggles lift, replaced by a profound sense of hope. As the evening wound down, Alexander raised his glass for another toast. "To the family we choose, the family we find, and the family we fight to hold on to," he said, his voice steady and sincere. Clara looked around the table, her heart full. "And to the people who remind us that even when life feels impossible, love and connection can light the way." The family clinked their glasses together, the sound ringing out like a promise of brighter days ahead. Clara's story reminds us that family is about more than shared blood. It's about forgiveness, resilience, and the courage to build bridges where walls once stood. What would you do if faced with a chance to mend a broken connection? Share your thoughts in the comments below, And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more inspiring stories like this one.